Back in 1992, more than 150 countries signed a new treaty established by the United Nations. The treaty created a multinational task force that would support the global response to the threat of climate change. Every year, delegations from countries signed up to this convention gather for the Conference of the Parties, more commonly known as COP. So what happens at COP, and does it really play a key role in the global fight against climate change? Nice wellies.
You like the wellies? I put them on especially for you, not quite so sure about yours. We don't normally put the wellies on in the countryside till at least October.
Well, these are my city wellies.
Yeah, it shows.
You got the dog as well, so you're a proper country bumpkin.
Well, don't tell everyone. What are we here to talk about? Why do you want to go for a walk with me?
We're going to talk about COP, and I thought it'd be nice to be out in nature, considering it's an important factor in everything to do with COP.
Well, a very warm welcome to the Ashdown Forest. Should we crack on?
Yes.
It's the Squawk Box Show with Karen Cho, myself, Steve Sedgwick, and these are your headlines.
CNBC's Steve Sedgwick anchors Squawk Box Europe. He's also covered energy for the last 20 years, reporting from both OPEC meetings with the world's biggest oil producers to critical climate conferences such as COP21. I wanted to ask him about the goings-on within COP and its effectiveness in achieving the world's climate objectives.
So, for those of us who haven't been to COP, what's it like?
Stunningly intense. Heads of state in and out, presidents, prime ministers, you've got their enormous entourages, the people who are actually doing a lot of the negotiation. You've got action advocates as well, the protesters outside, you've got security operation, which is absolutely enormous. The head of the negotiations in Paris once said to me, and this is Christiana Figueres, she said to me, it is akin to herding cats. You've got basically all walks of society, all talking about one issue. This is like a G meeting where you have the plethora of global issues. This is one issue, it's all about climate change and affects all parts of society.
A year after the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change came into force, the first COP meeting was held in Berlin, Germany in March 1995. Since then, climate change has gone from a fringe issue to a global priority. Certain COPs have achieved landmark agreements. COP3 in 1997 saw the adoption of the Kyoto Protocol, which legally binds developed country parties to emission reduction targets. And in 2015 at COP21, the Paris Agreement was born, arguably the most significant moment in COP's history. Today, the UNFCCC has near universal membership. The 197 parties, 196 countries plus the European Union, under the convention are treaty-bound to avoid dangerous climate change and find ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions globally.
What was the first COP you reported from?
Well, here's the thing. I've been to dozens of energy meetings over the last decade, but CNBC has actually only attended 2 COP meetings in the last 12 years. Now, the first was seen as a very unsatisfactory outcome. That was the COP15 that Jeff Cutmore went to in Denmark. It just didn't work. You had antagonism between emerging countries and the United States. There was nothing binding about it. But I went to the COP21 in Paris, where a lot of the ills of the previous meetings were addressed. And actually, it was a very successful meeting because at the end of it, you had the Paris Agreement, which is absolutely a seminal moment.
Every country signed up to the Paris Climate Agreement has agreed to limit global warming to no more than 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, with an aim for 1.5 degrees. To deliver on these targets, signatories need to make money available in order to adapt to the impact of climate change.
The Paris Agreement was far more binding than almost anything we'd seen beforehand as well. You had this commitment to get to net zero at some stage this century, but everyone was going to go about it in their own way. There was going to be a mechanism where everyone checks up on how they were progressing every 5 years. That was supposed to be Glasgow 2020, but the pandemic put paid to that, and that's why this meeting, the Glasgow COP26, is absolutely pivotal.
191 parties out of the 197 have ratified the Paris Agreement. However, although the agreement is legally binding, the commitments that countries have made to cut their emissions are not. These are known as Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs, and serve to only embody each country's efforts to reduce their emissions. The UNFCCC's aim is to ratchet up individual commitments and therefore the world's climate commitments over time.
The problem is, the scientists have looked at what is being committed to and what needs to be done, and there is a disparity there as well. Many scientists say that actually to get to 1.5 degrees C, a whole host of more commitments is needed from these parties. That's even if they do what they said they were going to do back in Paris in 2015.
So if the Paris Agreement is the best thing to come out of COP's more than 25-year history and it's still unable to limit global warming, then how effective really is COP?
Well, for a start, Tom, it was always seen as a starting point as well. It wasn't the be-all and end-all. This is where we start from in really getting serious about climate change. But let me give you a good example. One of the most important countries in the world, the United States, the president pulled them out of the Paris Agreement. But in the meantime, the US carried on. The federal states carried on, the corporations carried on. So the process was going on regardless of who was the incumbent of the White House. And I think that shows the worth of the Paris Agreement. And despite the rancor we're seeing on geopolitical stages, the Chinese, the United States, all the other big emitters, they still are developing plans and hopefully moving towards even better plans at COP26.
But as each country has its own socio and economic characteristics, I imagine some countries are a little bit more ambitious, shall we say, with their climate change goals?
I think the ambition's there, but it's just the reality of what's going on in the emerging world compared to the developed world. The developed world has the finance to do this. It has already industrialized, whereas a lot of the emerging nations, India being the great case in point, it was in 2015, it will be in 2021. It doesn't have the same socio-economic position, as you say, it doesn't have the same wealth, it's not at the same stage of industrialization. So it's very important for the Western nations to appreciate that actually these other nations to come along the same journey, to make those same commitments, need a hell of a lot of finance.
As hosts of COP26, the UK takes a leading diplomatic role in encouraging countries to commit to more ambitious 2030 emissions reduction targets that align with reaching net zero by the middle of the century. Alongside these emission reduction targets, the UN hopes that COP26 will commit countries to accelerate the phase out of coal, curtail deforestation, speed up the switch to electric vehicles, and encourage investment in renewables. Countries at the same time will need to adapt to protect communities and natural habitats, mobilise at least $100 billion in climate finance from developed countries per year, and work together to, amongst other things, finalise the Paris Rulebook, which makes the Paris Agreement operational. A report released before the COP26 summit said that only one country, the Gambia, is on course to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, while momentum has stalled for other countries such as Singapore and Russia.
Each signatory has their own targets for reducing their contribution to climate change. Here in the UK, the government's independent advisor on global warming has said the country needs to plant around 100 million trees a year to achieve its net zero carbon emissions goal by 2050.
Many scientists are saying that actually now is a last chance saloon. We have to really move in the next 5, certainly the next 10 years to avert the worst impacts of climate change and to try and keep that change to below 1.5 degrees centigrade. And there is another crisis as well, which is the global pandemic. And many countries see the recovery from the pandemic and averting a climate change and the worst parts of that climate change actually the same strategy. A lot of investment in digitization, a lot of investment in renewables as well. It's a unique opportunity for the world to get together and actually have a cohesive plan rather than just dribs and drabs left, right and centre for what many people think is the greatest and most existential crisis of our time.
It turns out that getting 20,000 or so people to meet at COP to discuss saving the planet can also harm the planet. According to the Polish Environment Ministry, a UN summit emits about 60,000 tonnes of CO2, roughly the same emitted by 7,000 homes in a year. Unsurprisingly, aviation makes up more than 80% of those emissions. But COP says it will offset the damage by planting enough trees to soak up those emitted gases.
Brought to you by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries.